Imagine waking up one morning and realizing that half of your life has been lived in secret, not from the world, but from yourself. You sit at the edge of your bed, staring into the quiet dawn, and a strange thought surfaces. What if the person I think I am is only half the story? You recall the polite smiles you've practiced, the careful words chosen to avoid conflict, the times you swallowed your anger because it was inappropriate, the dreams you abandoned because they were unrealistic, the instincts silenced because they were dangerous. You remember how often you've bitten your tongue, hidden your trembling hands, or turned away from the mirror because the face looking back carried too much truth. And then the thought sharpens, cutting deeper. If half my life has been lived in secret from myself, what has been steering me when I wasn't looking? Beneath the surface of the polished self, the self that obeys rules, meets expectations, and plays the part assigned, there stirs another presence. A silent companion who records every betrayal of your authentic impulse, who keeps every unspoken rage, every unacknowledged desire, every unclaimed piece of vitality. Carl Jung called it the shadow, the sum of all that we repress, deny, and exile into the dark corners of the psyche. We like to imagine we are in control, that our conscious mind, with its tidy narratives and moral codes, holds the steering wheel. But what if the truth is far more unsettling? What if much of your life has been scripted by this hidden double, acting through slips of the tongue, sudden bursts of anger, inexplicable attraction, and quiet sabotage? Think back to a time you hurt someone you loved and couldn't explain why. Or when you ruined an opportunity at the very moment it was within your grasp. Or when you told yourself, "I'll never be like my parents," only to become exactly what you feared. These are not accidents. They are messages from the shadow. And yet we run. We spend entire lives constructing masks, playing roles, trying to keep the forbidden self locked away. We pretend the shadow is not there. But repression does not destroy, it only deepens the shadow's hunger. And the more we deny it, the more it rules us from below. So here is the great paradox. The very thing we fear most, the darkness within, is also the key to our wholeness. Jung insisted, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. This raises a terrifying, liberating question. What if your fate has never been in the hands of God, society, or chance, but in the hands of the stranger living inside you? Will you continue to ignore that stranger, hoping silence will keep you safe? Or will you turn toward the shadow and risk seeing yourself fully, perhaps for the first time? That is the threshold. And once you step across it, there is no going back. The hidden problem and its psychological roots. Why do we fear the shadow so much? Why is it easier to exile parts of ourselves than to confront them? The roots are ancient, woven into the structure of society, morality, even religion. From childhood, we are taught that to be loved we must behave, conform, smile politely, suppress impulses that make adults uncomfortable. A child who screams in rage is scolded. A child who cries too loudly is silenced. A child who shows too much curiosity about forbidden topics is shamed. Bit by bit, we learn, if I want to belong, I must amputate parts of myself. This is the birth of the shadow, the unacceptable fragments of being. Anger, lust, envy, ambition, even wild joy, are pushed underground. The ego, desperate for approval, builds a persona, a mask fit for society's gaze. But the shadow does not die. It waits. Carl Jung saw this split as inevitable. Civilization requires repression. Chaos must be contained. But he also warned that the shadow cannot be erased. It only gathers power in the dark. Nietzsche described this tension when he spoke of Apollonian order and Dionysian chaos. Too much order and life becomes sterile. Too much chaos and life collapses. The human struggle is to balance the two without losing either. But our culture often tips too far into repression. We worship productivity, politeness, image. We demonize aggression, sexuality, vulnerability, despair. And in doing so, we forget that these energies, though dangerous, are also essential. Rage fuels justice. Desire fuels creation. Vulnerability fuels intimacy. Despair fuels depth. By denying them, we don't become virtuous, we become fragmented. The shadow, then, is not simply evil. It is potential. It is the raw clay of the self, both destructive and creative. To deny it is to deny life itself. Yet denial is seductive. Sartre spoke of bad faith, the refusal to face uncomfortable truths about freedom and responsibility. It is easier to pretend we are victims of circumstance than to admit that the darker impulses within us are also ours to own. We would rather believe fate is cruel than admit we sabotage ourselves. And so the shadow grows. It slips out in projections, when we condemn in others what we refuse to see in ourselves. Notice how quick people are to judge arrogance, greed, or weakness in others, while blind to their own. Jung saw projection as the shadow's favorite disguise. We cast what we hate in ourselves onto someone else, and then attack it out there. This explains why societies erupt in moral panics, witch hunts, scapegoating. The denied shadow of the collective must find release, and it does so by crucifying an enemy. But the problem never disappears, because the true enemy was within all along. Psychologically, the longer we repress the shadow, the more it bursts out in neuroses, addictions, compulsions. Viktor Frankl observed that modern people suffer less from actual deprivation and more from a sense of inner emptiness, an existential vacuum. Could it be that this emptiness is not the absence of meaning, but the absence of our denied self? Thus, the hidden problem reveals itself. The shadow is not just a private struggle, but the foundation of personal and cultural crisis. By refusing to confront it, we condemn ourselves to cycles of projection, emptiness, and unconscious self-destruction. The tragedy is that what we exile is often what we need most. The fire we fear could be the very light we were searching for. The unseen consequences. What happens when we continue denying the shadow? First, nothing obvious. Life goes on. You go to work, pay bills, smile at neighbors. But beneath the surface, cracks form. You begin to feel restless, unfulfilled, though you cannot say why. You chase distractions, scrolling endlessly, drinking, overworking. Anything to avoid the quiet moments when the shadow whispers. Psychologists call this disowned effect. Jung called it possession by the unconscious. Whatever is repressed does not disappear, it emerges in disguised form. You might find yourself lashing out at a friend for no reason, or sabotaging a relationship that was going well. You tell yourself, I don't know what came over me. But something did come over you, your shadow. Cognitive science supports this. Studies show that suppressed emotions intensify over time, erupting with greater force when triggered. The brain's limbic system does not obey repression. What is denied in the cortex returns through the body: muscle tension, anxiety, illness. On a societal level, the denial of the shadow breeds hypocrisy. Leaders preach morality while indulging in secret vices. Cultures idealize purity while hiding exploitation. Entire nations project their violence onto enemies, while refusing to face the aggression in their own history. The shadow does not stay private, it infects the collective. Perhaps you've seen it in your own life. Families where anger is never spoken, but passive aggression poisons every meal. Communities that pride themselves on kindness, yet turn cruel toward outsiders. Individuals who seem gentle until one day they explode with shocking violence. These are the shadow's fingerprints. The cost of denial is not only external conflict but inner fragmentation. You become divided, pulled between the mask and the truth beneath it. Nietzsche warned that he who fights monsters must beware not to become one. But perhaps the greater danger is fighting your own monster until it devours you. And so the shadow teaches by consequence. The more you deny it, the more it punishes you. Until one day, life itself collapses. The job is lost, the marriage ends, the body breaks down. Crisis arrives not as cruelty, but as invitation. The shadow demanding to be seen. The question is, will you listen before that collapse arrives? The rebellion, how to break free. What, then, does it mean to confront the shadow? It begins with rebellion, not against society, but against the lie you have told yourself. It is the courage to say, yes, I am jealous. Yes, I am capable of cruelty. Yes, I desire what I should not desire. Yes, I am not as good as I pretend. This rebellion is not indulgence. It is not about unleashing rage blindly or drowning in pleasure. That is still unconsciousness. Confronting the shadow means owning the darkness consciously, recognizing it, naming it, and integrating it into a larger self. Jung suggested practical steps. Pay attention to projections. Notice what irritates you disproportionately in others. Ask, what does this reveal about me? Keep a journal of dreams, for the shadow speaks in symbols. The chaste, the feared, the forbidden. Practice active imagination. Dialogue with the figures of your unconscious, not as fantasies, but as living truths. Philosophically, this is the path of wholeness. Schopenhauer spoke of life as will and representation, the blind forces of desire beneath the surface. To confront the shadow is to recognize that will within you, and instead of being enslaved by it, to redirect it consciously. History offers examples. Nelson Mandela, imprisoned for decades, emerged not with vengeance but with magnanimity, because he had faced his own rage and chosen transformation. Dostoevsky, after his near execution, plunged into the depths of suffering to write novels that revealed the darkest and most luminous aspects of the soul. Even Jung himself, in his Red Book, recorded years of visions where he confronted gods and demons of his own psyche, nearly losing his sanity. But from this chaos, his greatest insights emerged. Breaking free means redefining morality not as denial of the shadow, but as conscious dialogue with it. True goodness arises not from ignorance of evil, but from knowing you could harm and choosing not to. And so the rebellion is not loud, but silent. Not violent, but resolute. It is the daily work of turning inward and saying, I will not exile myself any longer. The ultimate truth, the final, most powerful realization. Imagine this. After years of searching, of peeling away illusions, of braving the storm of your own inner chaos, you arrive at the heart of the shadow. You stare into it, trembling, expecting only darkness, expecting a monster. And then something unexpected happens. You see yourself, not the polished self you present to others, not the mask you wear for survival, but the raw, untamed essence of who you are. The passions you denied, the rage you repressed, the tenderness you buried, the creativity you feared, the love you thought unworthy. It is all there, bundled together in the figure you once called your enemy. And in that moment of recognition, the final truth dawns. The shadow is not your adversary. It is your inheritance. Carl Jung once wrote that one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. We think enlightenment is about transcending our humanity, about purging weakness and rising into purity. But the paradox is that true light emerges only when it shines through darkness. Without shadow, light has no form. Without opposition, growth has no meaning. The shadow is the missing piece of the self. To reject it is to reject your wholeness. To accept it is to step into the fullness of being. Ask yourself, how much of your life has been lived as a half-being? How many choices have been dictated not by freedom, but by fear of what lies within you? How many dreams abandoned because they felt too selfish? How many truths silenced because they were too dangerous? How many times have you betrayed yourself to keep the mask intact? The final realization is that what you feared all along was not the shadow, but your own power. Consider this. The shadow is the storehouse of everything repressed, not only the destructive drives, but also the gold. Nietzsche called it the Dionysian element of life, the raw vitality, the madness, the ecstasy, the chaos that gives birth to creation. To deny this is to live sterilized, domesticated, obedient. To integrate it is to unlock a wellspring of energy, creativity, and authenticity. Artists, visionaries, revolutionaries, all those who changed the world, were not pure souls untouched by darkness. They were those who learned to dance with their shadows. Dostoevsky wrote the brothers Karamazov out of his battles with despair. Jung himself wrote his greatest works out of his confrontation with visions and dreams that nearly broke him. The shadow, once embraced, does not make you less human. It makes you more. But here lies the deepest paradox of all. you cannot fully control it. The shadow resists domestication. If you try to turn it into a pet, it will devour you. If you ignore it, it will sabotage you. The only way is dialogue, partnership, tension held without collapse. Jung called this the transcendent function, the ability to live with contradiction until a higher synthesis emerges. This is the ultimate truth. Wholeness is not the absence of conflict, but the harmony of opposites. You are not meant to annihilate your darkness. You are meant to carry it with dignity. To say, yes, I am capable of cruelty, and therefore I choose compassion consciously. Yes, I harbor rage, and therefore I channel it into courage rather than destruction. Yes, I know despair, and therefore my joy is not naive but earned. Wholeness is not saintliness. Wholeness is humanity fully embraced. And so the task is not easy. To live this truth is to walk a razor's edge between chaos and order, between freedom and responsibility. It is to resist the temptation of false purity on one hand and self-indulgent nihilism on the other. It is to embody what Jung called the self, a unification of opposites, a center greater than the ego, a consciousness vast enough to hold light and dark without splitting them apart. What would your life look like if you lived from that center? Perhaps you would no longer fear failure, because you would recognize failure as the raw material of growth. Perhaps you would no longer fear rejection, because you would know the worth of your own unloved parts. Perhaps you would no longer fear death, because you would see that you have already faced your own underworld and returned stronger. This is not mere self-help optimism. It is a call to initiation. Imagine now, years from this moment, you look back on your life. Did you live as a fragmented mask, always at war with yourself, always afraid of being found out? Or did you live as a whole being, flawed yet luminous, carrying both your demons and your angels with equal honesty? The choice is yours. But the truth is this: the shadow will not be denied forever. One day it will break through whether you invite it or not. The only question is whether you will meet it as an enemy in the dark, or as an ally by your side. The shadow is your mirror. To face it is to see yourself fully for the first time. To embrace it is to step into the terrifying, exhilarating reality of your own power. And to integrate it is to realize that what you once feared was the very key to your freedom. So I leave you with this: stop running. Turn around. Look into the eyes of the thing you fear most. And when you do, you may discover, perhaps with awe, perhaps with trembling, that the monster was never a monster at all. It was you. And in that moment of recognition, you will no longer be divided. You will be whole.